Airbnb has emerged as a major threat to the hotel industry, and big surprise, the hotel industry is trying to do something about that. Joining us to discuss this story is Katie Benner from the New York Times. How's it going, Katie?
Great. How are you?
Awesome. It's great to have you back here. Thank you for joining us tonight. So first of all, how big of a threat would you say Airbnb's model is to the long-standing tradition of how hotel bookings have been managed so far?
So it's a little bit complicated, and I'll break it down as simply as possible. So the hotel industry works just like the airline industry and many others, and that when times are busiest, they can charge more money. So if you want to fly on Thanksgiving, you will pay a lot more money than if you fly some other day of the year. And if you want to stay in New York City during New Year's Eve when things are really busy, or in San Francisco during, like the big Salesforce conference, you will pay a lot more money for your hotel. So what Airbnb does is it adds supply in almost every market that it's in, especially major cities where things like conventions and enormous celebrations happen. And because there's more supply, the pricing comes down. Now that's something that all hotel executives have sort of mentioned on their earnings calls, though they try to downplay it. The thing is that on those nights when there is what they call compression, that is when the industry makes a significant amount of its profits. Those are its most profitable nights, and those are the nights where, those nights sort of expand across the year to make the industry profitable. So when that is threatened, that does actually threaten profitability for the industry overall. And that is how Airbnb sort of chips away at how much money the industry can make, even if it's not taking away huge amounts of, even if it's not cannibalizing huge amounts of rooms from hotels.
Yeah, it can offer a small amount of rooms, but that actually ends up being a lot of money lost on the hotel side because they get so much more for those rooms that they're losing access to. Now, the New York Times obtained some documents that show how the American Hotel and Lodging Association is attempting to slow down Airbnb's progress. What do those documents reveal exactly in this case?
So what they reveal is an interesting multi-pronged legal approach to Airbnb. What they're doing mostly, there are other things too, but the bulk of it is to work with state and local regulators as well as attorneys general all across the country to show where Airbnb hosts are either breaking the law or in a really legal gray area to try to get hosts off of the site. I think New York City is probably the best example. Governor Cuomo passed a law imposing very, very steep fines on people who break the law in New York City. Now, I think there's no defending people who are breaking local law. I think that that's actually, totally justifiable to fine and punish people who are doing that. But the steepness but that has always been illegal, and everybody broke the law. They didn't take it seriously, and there were tons and tons of hosts on Airbnb because there's no real punishment. Now there's a real punishment, and it has curbed the number of hosts on Airbnb. And the fewer hosts, that means less supply on the market, which is better for the hotels. Now, they're not doing anything wrong. They're not doing anything. Trying to get local government to enforce existing local law is not necessarily wrong, but it is, a big part of their attack on Airbnb. And then in other places, they're trying to highlight where Airbnb has not served the community or is competing unfairly against hotels, especially when it comes to things like taxes. You don't have to pay if you rent a room on Airbnb, in some markets, you don't have to pay lodging taxes. But if you go to Marriott anywhere in the country, Marriott is going to collect from you, the user, a lodging tax that goes to local government. So they're trying to highlight those differences as well. And then the third piece is try to emphasize the number of professional commercial operators that exist on Airbnb. Airbnb's narrative is, we're helping mom and pop. We're helping like a single mom with 2 kids make ends meet by renting out a room in her house. The hotels industry narrative is, while those people do exist on Airbnb, it is mostly people who are professionally renting out 3 or more units and making a lot of money. And those are also the people who generate the most money for Airbnb.
So is that true what what the hotels are saying? Like, is it mostly the people that they own 3 houses in San Francisco that they never live in and they just rent them out as Airbnbs? Or is there a larger percentage of people that, really do rent out a room on Airbnb in order to afford to live in San Francisco or New York or any place like that?
So this is where it's impossible for me to say who's correct because, one, Airbnb refuses to give completely transparent data on that issue. So there's actually no way for anyone to know. And both the Airbnb and the lodging industry have paid for studies to prove their points of view. One of the funny things about what's going on with the AHLA is that they're actually just doing a lot of the same things that Airbnb is doing and has been doing all along. And the AHLA was just a little bit slower to it and not as good at it, frankly. But yeah, so both sides have now paid different researchers, whether it's Penn State or others, to come out with reports that support their point of view. I think the funniest one was Penn State because the hotel lobby paid for a study by Penn State, and then Airbnb paid for somebody else to debunk the study. So it's like really hard to know who is telling the truth. I actually believe that both sides are correct. There are both types of people on the service. We just don't know the proportion.
Yeah, is there any element of this that is an industry? Like there are parts of this that remind me of the kind of slow march to digital music distribution online and the record industry kind of grasping to, the way it's always been. And instead of kind of hunkering down and forcing themselves to innovate in order to compete on the same playing field and realizing like times have changed, things have moved on. Is this a case of that, of an industry that's kind of opting for litigation and politics over kind of realizing that this is a new digital landscape and maybe they need to innovate a little bit more?
Is really apt, and I think another reason why it's apt is because so one of the reasons why the record companies didn't want to innovate and they couldn't get it together to deal with digital music is because they were competing with one another. So Sony didn't want to cut some deal where suddenly Warner would own streaming music or have more streaming music, and the services themselves couldn't create their own streaming platforms because then they wouldn't be able to offer a full catalog of music because some artists wouldn't be on their labels, and they didn't want to form an alliance with one another because then they weren't sure how they would split up the profits. So that internal angst kept them from being innovative, and you'll see something similar with the hotels. Would it make sense for the Marriotts and Hiltons of the world to get together and create an online reservation platform? Of course, they've already been killed by the Expedias of the world and the Orbitz of the world, which is actually another part of their lobbying plan. They also want to start working hard to rein in those online travel agents as well. But their internal competition will keep them from effectively doing that. So you're right. They're really just putting off the inevitable, and they're spending a lot of money to do it.